Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me now. When you draw a line, you're not just marking a map, you're marking lives. Missouri's redistricting map, it ain't just geography, it's strategy, it's power. And when those lines are cut sharp, carved deep, manipulated with precision, they don't just divide communities, they divide voices. But let me tell you something, power only works if the people allow it. And tonight, I'm here to remind you your voice, your vote, your vision. It cannot be cut out of the map. Lines of power versus lines of people. This is where the story begins. A map is not just paper with borders, not just colors on a page. A map is a reflection of who belongs, who matters, and who gets to speak. When we look at the redistricting map of Missouri, what we see is not neutral. What we see is not innocent. What we see are choices, deliberate choices where lines are drawn not to represent people, but to protect power. Those sharp cuts, those sudden turns, those strange shapes that carve one community apart and glue another together, they are not accidents. They are the fingerprints of manipulation. They are the signature of politics, played like a game of chess, where the pawns are neighborhoods, and the prize is control of the people's voice. When power draws the lines, people lose their shape. Communities that have lived together, prayed together, worked together for generations, suddenly find themselves split down the middle. A single street divides them into two districts, two worlds, two sets of leaders who may never hear the same concerns, may never answer to the same cries. It is a division by design, a division that says your community is not strong enough to be whole, that your votes are not powerful enough to stand together, that your voice is safer when it is scattered. This is not representation, it is reduction. Lines of power are crafted with precision. They stretch, they bend, they twist in ways that follow no natural boundary, no river, no county road. Instead, they follow data, they follow numbers, they follow a strategy that sees voters not as human beings with families and futures, but as statistics to be shuffled until the outcome is guaranteed. Power looks at a map the way a sculptor looks at clay. Cut here, mold there, reshape until the figure that emerges is one they can control. And when that figure rises, it does not look like the people. It looks like the politicians who shaped it. But lines of people, those are different. Those are natural, organic, built from years of living side by side, raising children in the same schools, building businesses on the same blocks, celebrating victories and grieving losses together. Lines of people are made of history and memory. They do not twist and bend because they do not need to. They flow, they connect, they strengthen. Lines of people tell the truth about who we are. But when lines of power cut across lines of people, the truth gets buried. Communities are weakened. Voters are diluted. Representation becomes a shadow, a faint echo of what it was meant to be. That is why this fight is not just about shapes on a map. It is about the collision between two forces. Those who draw lines for power and those who live within lines of people. One force divides, the other unites. One silences, the other speaks. One guards its own interest. The other carries the interest of every man, woman, and child who calls Missouri home. Communities silenced, voices fractured. This is the hidden cost of redistricting when it is done not with fairness, but with manipulation. A community is more than houses on a street, more than voters on a list. It is a heartbeat, a living network of people whose strength comes from being together. But when the redistricting map of Missouri is cut in such a way that neighbors are separated, when a single block is split between two districts, the power of that heartbeat begins to fade. A united voice that once carried weight becomes broken into fragments, scattered into corners where it cannot be heard with the same force. This is not an accident. It is a strategy designed to weaken the natural power of people standing as one. When communities are divided, their ability to advocate for themselves is reduced. Imagine a town where the majority of residents share the same concerns: better schools, safer streets, more access to health care. If that town is kept whole in a district, its representatives cannot ignore those needs because the collective voice is too loud to dismiss. But when that town is carved apart, when one half is thrown into one district and the other half into another, those concerns lose their weight. Each fragment of the town becomes a minority voice in its new district, easy to overlook, easy to push aside. The issues that once could not be silenced are now muted, and the people who live there are left wondering why no one listens. Voices fractured means that the truth of a community is no longer represented. Instead of one clear picture of who they are and what they need, the map paints several incomplete images, none of them accurate. A community that is rural and hardworking may suddenly find itself grouped with a distant suburban area that has little in common. Their voice, once strong and clear, becomes drowned out by the larger population that now shares their district. The bond of shared experience is broken, and the representative who is supposed to serve them no longer sees their concerns as urgent. This fracture erodes trust in the system because people feel the disconnect between the life they live and the leaders who claim to represent them. The silence is not always loud. It is subtle, creeping in over time. It shows itself in policies that ignore local needs, in budgets that bypass certain neighborhoods, in laws that favor the interests of the powerful over the voices of the people. Communities that were once engaged begin to lose hope. They see their votes spread too thin, their influence too small, and they begin to wonder if participation even matters. That silence is not just the absence of sound. It is the absence of power, the absence of recognition, the absence of justice. When redistricting fractures voices, it takes away more than representation. It takes away dignity. It tells people that their history, their culture, their shared struggles and triumphs can be cut apart for the sake of political advantage. It diminishes the idea that government exists to serve the people, replacing it with a map that serves the powerful. Communities that should be whole, loud, and undeniable are left splintered and quiet, forced into the margins of democracy, where they wait to be heard but rarely are. The map is a mirror of justice, and when we look at it, we are not simply seeing lines and boundaries. We are seeing a reflection of what fairness means in practice. A map is supposed to capture the essence of a state, the communities that live within it, and the way their voices come together to shape governance. When drawn with integrity, it becomes a mirror that reflects equality, balance, and the dignity of representation. But when it is distorted, when lines are manipulated for advantage, that mirror does not reflect justice. It reflects bias, power, and inequality. The map becomes a statement about who matters and who does not, who gets to participate fully, and who gets pushed to the edges. Every bend, every cut, every division on a redistricting map carries a message. When districts are shaped to ensure that one group dominates, while another is minimized, the message is clear: justice is selective. That reflection tells us more than just who holds office. It tells us how deeply fairness is rooted in the system itself. A just mirror would show communities kept whole, their strength intact, their concerns represented. But a distorted mirror shows communities fractured, diluted, rearranged to serve interests other than their own. And when citizens look into that mirror, what they see is not their own power, but their own exclusion. The mirror of justice has always been tied to representation. True justice requires that people have a fair chance to choose leaders who will carry their voices into halls of power. But if the reflection in the map is manipulated, then the path to justice is clouded. The people who try to look for themselves in that reflection may find their image stretched thin, barely recognizable, as their votes are divided across multiple districts. They may see their community shrunk down into a corner of a district, where their voice is lost under the weight of larger populations with different priorities. What they see reflected back is not equality. It is imbalance, a system tilted away from them. This distorted reflection does more than just harm representation. It erodes belief in the very idea of fairness. Citizens begin to question whether justice is even possible when the mirror is cracked. They wonder if the rules of democracy are written for them or against them. When a map favors those already in power, it reveals a reflection of justice that is hollow, a surface that looks shiny but holds no truth. A broken mirror cannot show the real face of the people, only a twisted version that benefits those who control the lines. But the concept of a map as a mirror of justice is powerful because it shows that the truth is visible if we choose to see it. A fair map makes the people visible to themselves. It lets them see their communities clearly, their power intact, their ability to shape the future unquestioned. It reflects not the ambitions of politicians, but the reality of the people who live, work, and dream within its borders. The clarity of that reflection determines whether democracy feels real or feels rigged, whether justice is served equally or reserved for the few. Manipulation breeds mistrust, and nowhere is that clearer than in the redistricting process. When the people of Missouri see maps drawn with jagged edges, twisted shapes, and boundaries that make no sense to the human eye, they do not see fairness. They see games being played at their expense. They see leaders using the power of the pen not to serve the public, but to serve themselves. And once that suspicion takes root, once people believe that the system is rigged, trust begins to collapse. Trust in the fairness of elections, trust in the honesty of leaders, trust in the very promise of democracy itself. All of it starts to wither under the weight of manipulation. Mistrust spreads because manipulation is visible. A farmer in one county notices his town split between two districts that stretch miles away into unfamiliar territory. A family in a city neighborhood realizes their block has been carved out and attached to a district that shares none of their struggles. People do not need a political science degree to understand what has happened. They can see it with their own eyes. The map itself becomes evidence of betrayal. Every curve and cut feels like a reminder that the system does not prioritize their voice, but rather the ambitions of those already holding power. When citizens lose faith in fairness, they begin to disengage. Why vote if the outcome feels predetermined? Why participate if the system has already decided who wins and who loses before ballots are even cast? This is the dangerous legacy of manipulation. It does not just silence voices, it convinces people to silence themselves. Apathy sets in, not because people do not care, but because they feel their caring no longer matters. And when apathy grows, democracy weakens, leaving space for even greater abuses of power. Mistrust does not remain confined to elections. It seeps into the way people view all institutions. If the map is manipulated, they begin to question whether laws are written fairly, whether resources are distributed equitably, whether justice is truly blind. A manipulated map casts a long shadow, and under that shadow, every decision made by government feels tainted. Leaders may talk about unity, progress, and fairness, but the people who look at that map see none of it reflected back at them. They see boundaries that divide rather than connect, and they hear promises that ring hollow against the backdrop of a visible manipulation. At its core, manipulation replaces trust with suspicion. Instead of believing that leaders are accountable to them, people begin to assume leaders are accountable only to themselves. Instead of believing that democracy is a tool for their empowerment, they begin to suspect it is a stage where the outcomes are scripted in advance. Once trust is broken in this way, it is hard to restore. The wound deepens with each new map, each new set of lines that appear more like barriers than bridges. And with every manipulation, the mistrust grows stronger, corroding the bond between the governed and those who govern. Redrawing hope, Reclaiming democracy begins with understanding that maps are not destiny, they are choices. Every line on the redistricting map of Missouri represents a decision made by human hands, decisions that can either suppress or empower. When those lines are drawn with fairness, they become pathways for communities to be seen, heard, and respected. They create the conditions for voices to rise in unity and for representation to carry the true weight of the people's will. Hope is redrawn when communities realize that they are not powerless in the face of manipulation. They can demand transparency. They can demand accountability. They can insist that maps reflect people rather than politics. Hope grows when citizens recognize that democracy is not a gift handed down, but a responsibility taken up. It is reclaimed through action, through organizing, through refusing to accept divisions as permanent. A fair map is more than a political tool. It is a moral statement. It affirms that every voice counts, that every community has dignity, that the strength of democracy lies not in the cleverness of those who draw lines, but in the collective power of those who live within them. When people come together to insist on fair maps, they are not only redrawing boundaries on paper, they are redrawing the boundaries of justice, inclusion, and trust. That act of reclaiming is the very essence of democracy, where power flows from the people upward, not from politicians downward.